9980.
Gap, Pennsylvania, part of the August 76 phone trip with Dave. This office is a STEP. Its local calling area consists of a small collection of rural offices, all of them STEP, some Bell of Pennsylvania, some independent, and we are in the 717 Lancaster long-distance sector, but right up against the edge of the 215 area, and the 215 codes from here are in the Coatesville long-distance sector. This is an independent, and the phone is 3-slot. It's got a lot of clanging relays. You don't hear coins going in here because it's post-pay.
Sorry, got you by mistake.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Sorry for the mirrored affectation. She said, "Opener," and I said, "Sorry, got you by mistake." Anyway, here's an attempted 1+, which won't go through, and we'll see just how that happens. But I'll tell you right now, it's a funny pun, because this is Gap, Pennsylvania. After I dial the 1+ number, listen for the gap. Aha, so that's why they call it Gap, Pennsylvania, because when you try to dial a long-distance call from one of their payphones, the identifier triggers and there's no last 4 digits. It's key pulse 0442 Gap Start. And you could hear just a little bit of that Lancaster operator ring starting, but we've gotten dumped onto some sort of a silent line, so our toll call has been thwarted. It knows I'm at a payphone. Not only does the ID fail, but it doesn't even let you get the operator. Next, I dialed 442, the local exchange prefix, +5. The first 3 digits were absorbed. The 5 ended up going into another local office that has a 5 in it, and then I got a vacant level. So that's the office on 5. Is there another call to that office? We'll see. Now there is a local code 593 in Atglen, Pennsylvania. 593 is not the office on 5. It's actually on the 3 level, the 5 and the 9 absorb. It's a Bell System office, and it's also in a different area code. Gap is in area code 717. Atglen 593 is in area code 215, and as was the case in these days, you only dial 7 digits even though you're calling across an area code boundary. Here's 593, the 3 cuts into the trunk, and then a 0, which ends up going to Philadelphia AIS on a very hummy trunk. You'll hear a little MF start tone, which is produced by a relay device in Atglen that is going to send an MF6 plus a start to tell AIS to give us an operator.
Enemy calling, please.
593-0111.
593-0111.
Yes.
The number you have reached, 593-0111, is not in service. In area code 215, please check the number and dial again. 593-0111 is not in service. In area code 215.
Now that was cool. First of all, it took a long time to hang up from the Atglen trunk.
In area code 215.
finally hung up and got a new dial tone, we somehow were able to hear the identifier tone in this office, which is 1 kilohertz. Now, usually that tone is sent on the sleeve lead, so you shouldn't hear it that loudly. That was an unusual crosstalk condition. Somebody else was dialing long distance, and for some reason the ID tone was really loud on our dial tone. Well, that gave me the idea to try a 1+ call. If it works, we'll go out through the Lancaster 7177 crossbar tandem. Here's that dial tone with the ID tone from someone else's call leaked onto it, and on that I'm going to dial a 1+ number. You'll definitely hear the gap in the MF signaling, and we'll see what happens after that.
Your number, please.
442-8299.
Thank you.
Well, that just worked. I didn't have to do anything to it. Apparently, the toll restriction in this office is inconsistent, because this time I just dialed the number. It went through with the gap, and because something in this office didn't cut me off, it just went to the operator who asked for my number, because obviously the MFs didn't correctly convey it. And that was a successful call to the homemade charge test sitting at Ben's house. I, of course, hung up before it got to the point where it would have made a toll charge. That didn't complete. Here's another call to @Glen 593, which from this call we can tell is an independent. The Bell system doesn't have a ring like this. Got an answer, doesn't matter, it's post-pay. Strasbourg 687 in our same 717 area is a small Bell system step. It's hard to hear, but on the next call we cut in on the 3rd digit, I dial a vacant level, and I end up on Lancaster Centralized intercept.
You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number or try your call again.
You can tell the centralized intercept in Lancaster has that same pseudo-modern ring as did the Gamma operator.
Number, please.
Apparently the main Lancaster building has that kind of a tone plant. Now, in listening to this tape, I found that there was a missed opportunity, and that is this. Here I've dialed a 2-digit code and gotten a second dial tone, but I don't seem to understand that. I guess I mistakenly thought that I had just reset to the beginning. So I dialed a 5 and heard the hummy trunk over to that office, and then I hung up. wrong. That was a second dial tone, not a reset to the first selector. There's a difference, because the second dial tones will sometimes let you dial things that you couldn't dial from the payphone. In fact, right there, if I'd been paying attention, I dialed a 5 and went right into the office on 5. While dialing 5 on a regular dial tone absorbs because of 593. You don't cut into 5 unless you dial an absorb digit first, like a 2 or an 8, as we'll see later. Second dial tones like this will sometimes let you call the operator and not show up as a payphone. And fortunately, on one of the stops in the next day, New Tripoli it's pronounced, Pennsylvania, I did find one of those second dial tones in the local area and knew what to do with it. But hey, what can I say? This was our last stop of the day, and it was a long day. 768, in our same 717 area, is in the town of... I'm bleeping the town name for now, you'll see why later. It's independent, but it's in the Lancaster sector. My first call to 768 reached something that just went off hook. I ended up hanging up on it. Here it is. When we call the town of, the 7 is absorbed, the 6 goes into the trunk tube, and then the 8 is absorbed there. Here's a call to a 768 test number. Oh, that's funny. I was trying to hang up on it, and twice it made my phone bell here ring. I'll play that again. You know, by the way that tone clicks off and on, that is quite possibly a loop-around test line. Now, the thing about loop-arounds is they were officially used for testing, but sometimes people would find out about them outside of the company, and you could talk through them. So you literally could meet someone through that line. There's a companion phone number, and the two of them connect together. So I was just thinking, if people were using that to meet, they would literally be meeting through the loop-around, which, depending upon how it goes, would make sense. You know, our trip took us through that town, and actually I had some car trouble along the way. So there we were by the side of the road. Dave and I were out there, and a woman came by in her horse and buggy, and she very obviously was Amish. Those folks have a typical way that they dress. Interestingly, the horse-drawn buggies that they use do have electric taillights that flash. They don't like to use modern technology, but I guess the state requires them to put those electrical taillights on the back. So despite the Amish well-known dislike for anything technical, including electricity, they do have to have electric lights on their buggies. So anyway, when I explained my car was broken down, she was really nice. She said, "Can I take you guys to..." And I said, "The whole way?" And she said, "Sure." And I was like, "Both of us?" And she said, "Of course." And I said, "Well, that would be wonderful." But frankly, I didn't know you Amish girls were allowed to do that sort of thing. Anyway, here's a call to the vacant level in...
The number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial your operator. Thank you. This is a recording from Intercourse, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, the number you have reached is not in service at this time. If you need assistance, please hang up and dial drop. Thank you. This is a recording from Intercourse, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, the number...
You know, I guess the Amish are the only people who could be trusted with an innocent name like that for a town. But the funny thing is, I can make fun of the Amish all I want, and they're never going to hear this.
What number are you calling?
442-8211.
Thank you. We showed as the wrong number. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Well, she was on 2600 carrier. That was a non-working number here in Gap, which goes to the Lancaster Centralized intercept. You even heard some MF crosstalk with a typical sounding frequency inversion. You hear that a lot on long-distance calls. From the last call, it looks like the ringtone here in Gap sounds like it's the same as at Glen 215593. Let's put them side by side. First Gap, then at Glen. Pretty close. Now here's an intra-office busy signal by dialing my own number. Well, next are some calls to the office on 5, which is Parksburg, area code 215857. When you dial 8, it is absorbed here. The 5 goes through to Parksburg, and then the 7 goes to a second selector in Parksburg. You can actually hear it. It makes a cut-in noise, and the background hum is different. When you dial something invalid on that second selector, however, you get the very same reorder tone. So you could dial 85 plus 1 and get this reorder, or you can dial 8570 and get this reorder. Wow, you really have to hang up a long time to get off the trunks here. I choinked the first time I tried to hang up. Anyway, here are 2 more calls to the Parksburg office. There are some hellacious hums on the selectors. This is a Bell System 355 step, has a nice raucous ring, but first here's a busy number. That was an answer, and I hung up on it, and again my phone rang. Seems like every time you hang up on an answered local call, this payphone bell rings. From the tape, I can't tell why they have a second selector on 7. It may be that there is another local office that Parksburg is used as a tandem to reach. So it might be, for example, that you dial 25, and then when you get to Parksburg, another digit goes to yet some other place. Only the 7 goes to Parksburg numbers. That's going to remain a mystery because there's only one more local call on this tape, and that is to a 442 number that goes high and dry. You get to hear some of the office noise, though. Here it is. Here's dialing 11. The first one goes into the toll trunk to Lancaster XPT. The second one makes Lancaster put on a reorder. We can get the vacant code recording from the Lancaster crossbar tandem by dialing 1 plus 311 1111. Since Lancaster doesn't go off hook when it gives us that vacant code recording, our identifier is not triggered and toll restriction doesn't happen, so we're able to hear the recording. During a pause in the dialing, you can hear the identifier tone leaking over from some other call.
We're sorry, but we have a problem in completing your call as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or ask your operator to help you. This is a recording, 7177. We're sorry, but we have a...
At this point, Dave and I walked away from the payphone feeling as if we were done. But we just couldn't resist picking up another payphone to hear that identifier thing and calls going through again. In the process, Dave got a trunk where not only did the toll restriction fail, allowing the call to go through, but you could make the identifier re-trigger by flashing once the call had gone through. Here's that trunk. We didn't have the recorder going at first, but when we saw that the identifier was repeating over and over every time we flashed, then we turned on the tape recorder. So now we know there are 3 possible outcomes that can occur when you try to dial a long-distance call from one of these coin phones. The intended outcome is that the identifier triggers with the usual gap, but at the end of that you're left on dead silence, so the toll call is thwarted, like this. The second possibility is when the toll restriction in the gap office fails. This means the call goes through anyway despite the gap in the MF sequence because Lancaster simply brings up an operator to ask for your number. We heard that earlier. The third possibility is that that happens, but then you can make the identifier re-trigger by flashing your hook. Here's an example where I did not speak to the operator because I was trying to get the identifier to MF to her. So she released and the P recording came on. Once that recording was playing, we were able to get the identifier to re-trigger, sometimes sending the usual key pulse 0442 gap start. Other times sending key pulse plus 1 and then a start tone or 2. The key pulse followed by 1 is a deliberate signal used on multi-party lines. Those aren't supposed to be able to dial direct without the operator coming on to ask for the number. So a line that has more than 2 people on it cannot have automatic number identification because the equipment to tell who's who is just too expensive to put in that case. So for those lines, 3 or more parties, they just send key pulse 1. That says bring the operator up on all calls and ask for the number. The start or starts are just there because it's easier to do it that way. Anyway, here's the call where we went to the P recording, got the thing to trigger over and over, and one time it sent key pulse 1 instead of key pulse 0442 gap.
Number pace.
Sorry, but because of the equipment condition, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording 7177. We're sorry, but because of the temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Will you please try again? Recording 7177. We're sorry, because of the temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Please hang up and try again. This is a recording 7177. Sorry, but because of the temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Hang up and try again. This is a recording 177. But because of the temporary equipment condition, your call did not go through. Hang up and try again. This is a recording 7177. Equipment condition. Call did not go. Will you please try again? This is a recording 7177.
Apparently Ben was not home today because had he been home, we would have called him to do the following. But he wasn't, so we called his switch room. Here's a call to the switchman in the Bell Harbor office in Queens. It's a free call because the switch room line doesn't go off hook. After he answers, I trigger the identifier to MF in his ear. He only stays on to hear it twice.
Your number, please.
4428299.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go, you can hear me saying. That finally was enough. Well, you know, I'm glad I got to narrate this because this was one of the more memorable stops of this phone trip. I remember it was our last stop that day. Actually, it was nighttime by the time we were doing this. And as I drove away with Dave, I kept hearing in my mind over and over again. We slept in the car, and the next morning we crossed into area code 215, where our first stop was Morgantown in the Conestoga Tell and Tell area. If you want to hear our next stop, it's Conestoga Tell Program 1, an ESC in Morgantown. One more note, This identifier was found in another place. Actually, the first place I saw it that I know of was Rawlinsville, previously on this phone trip. Very much of a similar place to Gap, but not quite as interesting a tape. But I found this identifier again on my March 1977 phone trip to Pinetown, North Carolina, and that time I had the presence of mind to try flashing while it was in the middle of its gap, and I found that I could actually reliably drop it out by flashing. Didn't try that here. So that identifier will be heard again in the Pinetown recording.